So there you go. We're going to kick this off with a presentation from Asa Brayton and Tessa Yip, who are both with the Department of Environmental Conservation River Corridor and Floodplain Protection Program. Then we're also very fortunate today to have three people who have on-the-ground experience in floodplain administration. And that is Kristen Leahy, who is the zoning administrator and also the flood recovery officer for the town of Hardwick, as well as John Prue from the town of Linden, who's the zoning administrator, and Dan Webster, also the zoning administrator from the town of Groton. We also have a number of visitors from other parts of the state, other regions, and we're really excited about that. So if you have questions during the presentation, the chat, as I've been reminded, is disabled, but you can post questions in the Q&A, and we will be monitoring that. Also, after the presentation, if you have a burning need to pose a question verbally, you can raise your hand and I can briefly unmute you. But for now, you are on mute. So I don't want to take up any more time here because I know this is a very condensed and dense piece of information here. So I'm going to turn it over to Asa and Tessa. So take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. All right, everyone hear me okay? I know everyone can't speak, but we're good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks everyone for being here. Asa and I are really excited to talk to you about floodplain administration in Vermont, what you need to know. I know Allison gave a bit of an intro, but my name is Tessa Yip. I am the Engagement and Community Support Floodplain Manager here at DEC. Asa, do you want to say hi?
And I am Asa Brayton. I am a Regional Floodplain Manager, currently serving as a contact for Southern Vermont. Turn it back to you, Tessa.
And then we actually also have Sasha Peeler and Alexis Nevins here on our team. Do you both want to do a quick hello?
I am Sasha Peeler. I have the privilege of working with the Northeastern part of the state, and Alexis is going to be taking the reins for regulatory work in the Northeastern for the state too. So,
Yep. And I'm Alexis Nevins, taking over the Northeast region. So nice to meet you all, and I look forward to working with you all soon.
Great. Thank you. All right, we can go and get started. Sasha, you want to go to the next slide?
does that work? Is it advancing for you all?
Not yet.
No.
Okay. Perfect. We'll start that again. There we go. Should have worked now.
Okay.
There we go.
Excellent. All right, so we have a bit of an agenda for our presentation. We're going to try to get through a lot in the next 30 minutes or so. We'll leave some time at the end for questions. But we're going to start by talking about flooding in Vermont, and then we'll get into the National Flood Insurance Program, the role of the floodplain administrator, talk a little bit about the permit process, or at least an outline for a permit process, tips for when a flood happens, some updates around new flood maps, some helpful resources for floodplain administrators, and then we'll take questions at the end. Again, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A, or you could raise your hand once we get to that section and we can unmute you. We'll get to as many questions as we can. We probably won't reach all of them, but we'll do what we can. All right, let's get going.
Oh
If
my
it's being
gosh.
slow, Sasha, I can also see if I can share the deck. See if it'll work better for me.
Yeah, why don't you try it?
Okay. Okay.
Wouldn't be a Zoom webinar without technical difficulties.
Okay, what version is everyone seeing?
That's the presenter version.
So you can see notes and things?
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
If you do the display settings, under that, there should be a switch button. It's on the top. Oh, that works too.
On the top, sorry, where is it?
Oh, it's when you were in the presenter.
Mm,
That looks good though.
display settings. Oh, interesting that I can't.
It had looked good before you entered into that. Sorry.
We'll get there eventually.
There.
Okay,
That looks good to us.
all right.
Okay.
Okay. What we got here? Okay, so let's just do a little context setting, pulling it back a little bit. Flooding in Vermont. We know that flooding is a #1 natural disaster in the state of Vermont. It's been happening pretty much forever, and it's not getting any better. So looking at annual precipitation changes, you can see looking at this, comparing data for, let me move you over. Comparing data from 1901 to 1960 to 2002 to 2021, the percent precipitation change across the country. Looking at Vermont, you can see that that's like a 10 to 15% change in precipitation between these two periods, which is pretty significant. So Vermont is really seeing both an increase in the amount of rainfall we're getting, as well as the occurrence of the rainfall or the frequency of it. And then this is a graph that shows the public assistance to Vermont that we've received between 1990 to 2019. We can really just see the increase kind of around 2010, 2011 with Hurricane Irene, and just seeing the amount of money and the growth over time of public assistance to Vermont that we've been seeing. I know it doesn't show 2023 and 2024, but I think it still is a good, helpful representation. So what is a floodplain? I think a lot of the time when we talk about living in floodplains, we're often talking about like a FEMA flood zone, but a floodplain is a natural part of our system. So by definition, it's the low-lying area next to a stream that gets wet during a high water event, or it's the area that gets inundated by water when water spills over the top of a riverbank. So once water is able to spread into a floodplain, it really dissipates, slows down. It's able to release a lot of energy, which is a huge benefit of a floodplain. Storing floodwaters, decreasing the floodwater velocity. It has a lot of other natural benefits as well. Helps keep water clean, traps sediment by acting like a filter. It also creates habitat for fish and insects and birds and a bunch of other kind of wildlife. And then really, it has a strong community value, especially for Vermonters. I think floodplains are beautiful. They are a huge spot for recreation and for tourism in our state. So a FEMA floodplain, which is also known as the Special Flood Hazard Area, is really what we're talking about when we're talking about, risk. So from FEMA's perspective, a Special Flood Hazard Area, their SFHA, is the high-risk area for flooding. So the area in red is the SFHA. This is also the 1% chance of flooding in any year, or the 1% chance flood. You can also hear it referred to as the 100-year flood, which is kind of misleading. That makes it sound like it's only going to happen every 100 years, but in reality, it has a 1 in 100 chance of happening in any given year. And then this is also known as the base flood. So on these maps, you'll typically see zones A or AE for river flooding. There are some others, but these are really what you're mostly going to see. A zone AE was found with detailed studies, so it's going to have a base flood elevation. It'll also have a floodway, which is this cross-hatched section on the map. A floodway, it's used in regulation, so it's kind of a regulatory term. It's the area that we try to like prevent encroachment on. But when a flood happens, it's really the area that's going to have dangerous, fast-moving floodwaters. So we try to stay out of that area. And then Zone A is not done through detailed studies, so it does not have a base flood elevation. There could be some towns where you see both of them on a map, but often it's one or the other. And then an important note is that this only represents inundation flooding, which is significant in Vermont because we know that we deal with both inundation flooding as well as erosion flooding. So we have inundation flooding on this photo on the left, and then erosion flooding on the right, where you see this, road that was partially eroded by obviously very fast-moving, very powerful water. So with our topography, we have very flashy streams that are very powerful. So it's really important to consider both of these types of flooding when we talk about flood risk in our state. So that's why we have river corridors. So river corridors, if anyone's heard the term before, are mapped in the state of Vermont, and they are essentially the area on the side of a river on either side in which a river is going to naturally move. So over time, a river moves itself. A river will try to find its slowest, least erosive path down a valley. It's going to really create that meander formation versus, a straight line that is like human created. So keeping us out of river corridors, keeping our communities out of river corridors and protecting those river corridors can really help to keep us safer from erosion damage. An important point is also that about 75% of flood damage costs in Vermont are because of erosion damage from flooding. So to really get the full idea of flood risk here, it's really important for us to consider both the SFHA as well as the river corridor. So looking at both of these kinds of risks can help inform where it's safer for us to live, where it's safer for us to build. You can see on this map on the right, this is just an example of a map you might see. The special flood hazard area and the river corridor do overlap, but they are mapped very differently. You can see that, they can extend outside of one or the other. They're studied differently. I think the way I think about it is that you can have, a riverbank erode really close to a house, but the house can still be dry, which is why it might not be in a special flood hazard area, but it can still be within a river corridor. And you can find these maps in a couple different places. So the Vermont Flood Atlas has all of the digital flood insurance rate maps from all of the Vermont communities. It also has the mapped river corridors as well. So in the previous slide with the image of the overlay between the two, you'll be able to see that here. The image on the right is what it looks like, where you can toggle on the flood data and river corridors. A lot of towns in Vermont don't have digital flood insurance rate maps. They still have paper maps. So you can see an approximation of those maps on the Flood Atlas. Our team created that a couple of years ago, I want to say. So it can give you an idea of what the firms look like. If you need something much more official and absolutely correct, I would go to the FEMA Map Service Center. You can look up your town and you can view all of the firm panels on there. All right, Asa.
All right, thanks, Tessa. Yeah, so Tessa talked about the river corridor and the SFHA. I'm going to hone in on specifically the National Flood Insurance Program, which speaks to the special flood hazard area. So many of you are probably in participating communities, but maybe there's a couple folks in here that are in communities looking to join or just wanting to get some information. So we're going to go kind of a general overview of the NFIP. This section has been very condensed. There are classes on this that are 4 days long. So these are very general. If the one thing you get from this is if you have questions that you should come to us with them, then that's perfect. So the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, has 3 major components. The first one being flood hazard maps. So flood hazard maps are meant to inform us on where the risk is. They're not perfect, but they inform us on where that inundation flood hazard risk is. The floodplain management regulations help us to mitigate that risk by requiring how development is built in the SFHA. So it requires you to build in a safer manner when building in the SFHA. And then the last portion of it is the insurance aspect. No matter how much we mitigate and no matter how safely we build, there's likely to still be flood damage at some point. So flood insurance helps to assist in recovery after a flood, funding to be able to rebuild in a safer manner by either relocating or elevating, floodproofing, etc. Next slide. So we'll talk about some of the benefits of the NFIP. So in the NFIP, everyone in the community has access to NFIP flood insurance anywhere in the community. Doesn't matter if you're in the SFHA or not. This can be important because for communities that are not in the NFIP, you may only have access to private flood insurance, which can pick and choose who they want to give insurance to. They may not give insurance to you at all. This can also be important because properties that are within the SFHA that need a federally backed mortgage to be purchased, if you have a mortgage in the SFHA, you're required to have flood insurance. So it sometimes may be very difficult to sell a property that's in the SFHA if you can't get flood insurance. Another one of the benefits is access to post-disaster funds. So this is access to some extra financial support after a disaster. Some of you are probably familiar with ERAF matching, that kind of thing. One of the next benefits is flood protection. Inherently, by having regulations that dictate how things need to be built in the floodplain, you're minimizing exposure to flood damage by elevating and building in a safer manner. And the last one I wanted to talk about is mitigation funds. So by being in the NFIP, you have access to hazard mitigation grants, and those can be used for things in blue sky times to help prevent damages by elevating homes or participating in buyouts. Next slide. Maybe? Okay, thanks. So maybe if you're folks that are looking into joining the NFIP, this is a general overview of what that process looks like. There's a 1-page application form that has information about the town, contact, that kind of thing. The next part is a resolution of intent to participate, which is signed by municipal officials, just saying that this is what we plan to do and we're planning to join and enforce these regulations. The next step is the regulations themselves. So the meat and potatoes of this is that you have NFIP compliant regulations on a local level. These are things that are administered by the town itself and processed completely by the town. So it's also important to note that even if your town does not have zoning regulations, it would still be required to have flood hazard area regulations. And then the last part of that is then that FEMA would come and do a community assistance visit just to make sure that everything looks good, you're good to go, and then you're in the NFIP. Next slide. I'm sure many of you are already in the NFIP and are maybe wondering, like, what exactly do I need to be doing on the regular day-to-day basis? So to continue to be in the NFIP, you're required to have an administrative officer, or often called floodplain administrator, to administer the regulations. So issuing or denying flood hazard area permits. Next slide. So continuing on that train of thought, some floodplain administrator responsibilities include issuing or denying permits for all development in the SFHA, and we'll touch on what qualifies as development a little bit later. Record keeping, so any information that comes in with applications or permits needs to be kept forever. This can either be as a paper copy or a digital copy, but those need to be held on to forever. Inspections, so after a permit has been issued, keeping up with the construction and making sure that it's adhering to the permit that was issued, as well as checking in after the construction to make sure that everything matches up and is in line with regulations. And then the last part that I wanted to mention was substantial damage determinations, which is done by the floodplain administrator, and I'll touch on that again a little bit later. Next slide. So the permitting process, I've got a very, very basic overview of what that process looks like. And I'll actually have you go to the next slide, I think. Because Tessa made this gorgeous decision tree that'll kind of guide you through the very basic process of what the permitting process looks like. So the first question you want to ask when you get an application is this project in the SFHA? Because if it's not, then you're not going to need to issue a floodplain permit. If it is, then you want to take a look at it and make sure that it has enough information in the application to determine whether it follows the town regulations or not. If it is not following the town regulations, then you can often work with the applicant to move things around, change things to make sure that it does follow regulations, or if it's just something that's not going to work, deny it. Once you've made that preliminary decision and you have all the application materials necessary, you'll go ahead and send that to us, your DEC Regional Floodplain Manager. We will look at it for comments and any questions that you may have, maybe offer some suggestions on, hey, have you considered this as an option? This kind of might be a best practice that you could use, and we'll send it back to you with our comments. If it is a conditional permit, it needs to be sent to the appropriate board for review. And if it is a permittable item that can just be permitted by the zoning administrator or floodplain administrator, then they can go ahead and issue or deny that permit. Again, this is a very high overview. Always check with your town to make sure what you're specifically doing is what needs to be done. Right, next slide. So we have kind of a sample permit here. Every town is going to look a little bit different, but some of the things that should be on there to make sure that you can make a determination of whether it follows the regulations or not is having applicant information like name and contact info, parcel information so you know where to look on the floodplain map. You want an in-depth project description, knowing like what are the materials that you're going to use? Are they flood safe? Are you going to be anchoring it? As much detail as possible is very helpful. And then the last two are elevation data. So a lot of times you'll need to have base flood elevation to make sure that something is appropriately elevated or flood proofed, and property elevation for the same reasons. Next slide. So I had mentioned before in the permitting process, DEC Regional Floodplain Managers. So we are here to help you. Go ahead and get us involved like as soon in a project as you like, the sooner the better. We're always here to be able to answer questions or offer comments about, hey, does this look to follow some of our regulations? We're here to help you. And we're in a little bit of flux right now. We've had some great new hiring happen. Welcome, Alexis. Welcome, Tessa. So if you go to that link, you'll have the most up-to-date information on who you need to be contacting and sending those permit applications to. Next slide. Okay, talking about bylaws. The bylaws are what outline how things need to be built and what you need to be looking at in the applications. They are a community level, so they are locally administrated. And they also need to meet NFIP minimums. Every community's bylaws are going to be slightly different, so make sure that you're looking at your community's most up-to-date bylaws when doing your reviews. And we have a bullet on here to talk about the state model bylaw. I believe we'll touch a little bit on that later, but that can be a useful resource to be able to look at if you're looking to update or looking for some more specific language to implement into your own bylaws. Next slide. Okay, so I said that we touch on what is development. The NFIP definition for development can sometimes vary from what your zoning definition would otherwise be. The NFIP description of development is any human-made changes to improved or unimproved real estate. So obviously that would include things like structures, but then can include some things that are maybe lesser thought of, like filling, grading, dredging, paving, just the movement of dirt. Another one would be interior construction. So any interior construction that's more than just the general maintenance of a building, and this this includes anything that doesn't change the footprint. It doesn't have to change the footprint. It still needs a permit. It's also including accessory structures, so sheds or barns, and then things like fences and signs also need to be permitted. Next slide. So earlier I had mentioned substantial damage determinations. Substantial damage is when a structure in the SFHA is damaged to 50% or more of the cost of the structure. So when that happens, it can be by flood, fire, anything that damages the structure. What needs to happen when a structure in the SFHA is damaged is that the floodplain administrator will go out and make an assessment of the property. If it has been substantially damaged, then everything about the property needs to be, or everything about the structure needs to be brought into compliance. So if it was previously below the BFE, it could need to be elevated, or if it's in the floodway and your community does not allow for residential structures in the floodway, it could need to be removed completely. Which is to say, non-substantial damages still need to be permitted, but differently than substantial damages. I also wanted to touch on substantial improvements here, which are improvements to a structure in the SFHA that are also 50% or more the value of the structure. And I say specifically the structure, it's not the value of the entire property, it is specifically the structure that is being improved. In that case, it also needs to be brought into compliance, so either elevated, flood-proofed, etc. Next slide. So I wanted to talk about what are some things that you can do in blue sky times that can assist you before a flood happens. We don't want it to, but sometimes we can't control it, it happens. So some of the things that you can do to prepare before that is to create a list of addresses that are in the SFHA that you'll need to check on post-flood, having a form fillable substantial damage determination sheet, so you're not having to type up each of the determinations after the fact, and then also having an information sheet to be able to post on properties in the SFHA. If it's a rather large flood and it's going to take a while to complete all of the assessments, being able to put that information sheet on people's doors or mailboxes or something to tell them, wait, we need to do an assessment of this property before you can begin repairs, can be something that's helpful. Next slide. And then post-flood, what are some requirements for the floodplain administrator post-flood? So anything in the SFHA will require permits for post-flood repairs. Anything getting repaired needs a permit, regardless of if it was substantially damaged or damaged. The administrator then also needs to make assessments to all of them, issue substantial determinations if necessary, and make sure that they are assessed prior to repairs. All right, back to you, Tessa.
Okay, let's see if I can go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so we have some changes on the horizon that are just helpful for floodplain administrators to be aware of. The big change is that we have new flood maps coming from FEMA, which is very welcome because a lot of Vermont flood maps are incredibly outdated. There are some towns where this is the first update since the 1980s. And these are different in a few ways. So these use something called baseline engineering for the data. So baseline engineering essentially combines like computer modeling with like high resolution ground data. And what's also different this time around is they'll be done through like a watershed approach. So instead of going county by county and having a flood zone end at a county boundary, we're actually going to have flood maps that represent a watershed. They will be released by county. So every county is kind of in a different stage right now. Most are still in the waiting for work map stage. Some counties have received their work maps from FEMA, like Orleans County has received theirs. In terms of projected dates for these maps to go effective, we're still looking at 2028, most likely. The dates do sort of keep shifting. But to stay updated, you can go to this bit.ly link. It's bit.ly/FEMA map update. There's a page on the Flood Ready website that will list all the counties as well as an FAQ. But the counties will show basically all the projected dates for their maps. So that's a great resource to save and to have. A really important thing to note, though, is that municipalities must have bylaws that meet the NFIP minimum standards by the time these maps go into effect. So if a town doesn't have an up-to-date or a bylaw that meets the standard, they could be at risk of suspension from the National Flood Insurance Program. So, as Asa mentioned earlier, we do have a state model bylaw. So this model is a great resource for towns to have as they go through the process of updating their bylaws. It's a great time to adopt a higher standard. This bylaw does follow this principle of no adverse impact, which is really this idea of, the actions of one property owner should not adversely impact the actions of another property owner. And it addresses both the special flood hazard area in the bylaw as well as river corridor protection, although towns don't have to adopt river corridor protection. It has also been vetted and approved by FEMA. So, if you were to adopt these standards, we know that FEMA would accept those to meet the requirements of the NFIP. All right, and then we have a few resources that are helpful, and we will send out all of these links afterwards or tomorrow to everybody. I know it's a lot of different websites and web pages, so we'll get those out to people. We have the Flood Ready Vermont site and flood training websites. Flood Ready is a lot of focused on community planning for flood mitigation and flood resilience. There's information on the National Flood Insurance Program and some other ways to find funding. We also have the flood training website, which is focused more on municipal officials and how they can kind of build resilience in their communities. But there's really helpful educational tools on flood training Vermont that I think I would recommend to anybody, especially if you want to learn more about river corridors. There's some good videos and really accessible information on there. And then we also have the Flood Atlas that I mentioned earlier, where you can view your digital flood insurance rate maps, as well as the river corridor mapping in the state of Vermont. And then we also would recommend the Association of State Floodplain Managers. They have a totally free NFIP 101 course. It's all online. I feel it's like eight sections or so about the NFIP. They estimated that being 15 hours. From personal experience, I would say it's more than that, but it is still very worth it. It's a pretty deep dive into how to read flood maps, how flood maps are created, what are, the requirements of an NFIP community, what does the floodplain administrator do? So it's incredibly helpful if this is relevant to your work, and it's free, which is great, and you can kind of do it on your own time. And you can also receive continuing education credits if that's something that you want or need. And then just to reiterate, if that's, if there's one thing you can get from this is that your regional floodplain manager is very much here to support you. So again, save this link here. especially as we kind of go through team growth and team changes. It's helpful to keep track of who your regional floodplain manager is, but come to them with questions around permitting. If you need help reading a map, understanding a map, anything, they're here to support you. Okay, and then we have our contact information for Asa, myself, Alexis, and Sasha. Again, we can include our contact information in whatever resources we send out later on. But contact us for whatever you need. Even if I'm not a regional floodplain manager, you can still contact me and I can always get your questions to the right people. Okay, so now we have some time for questions. I am going to stop sharing.
And we've had some great questions come in during the presentation.
Excellent.
And we've been answering some of them as we go along. And some of them I think are worthy of revisiting. First of all, I just want to make sure and reiterate that the presentation is going to be recorded and we will distribute the slides. So that problem is solved. That's an easy answer. The one person from the town of Rockingham wants to know what the average time for a town to adopt a version of the state model flood standards is. And my experience is it really depends on the town. I worked with the town of Burke, adopting an earlier set of model regs, and that took upwards of a year, as well as studying some of the map data, but that also included, river corridor data at the time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And one thing I meant to mention that I don't think I did is that we don't recommend the towns wait to get their new maps from FEMA before starting this bylaw update process. If you wait until you have the maps, there's just not going to be enough time in order to get these bylaws up to the standard they need to be for the maps to go into effect.
That's a good point. Town of Norwich, do subdivisions require flood hazard review?
So no, if there is no development occurring, if it is strictly just a subdividing of the property and nothing is changing on the ground, there does not have to be a flood hazard area permit.
Okay. Town of Morgan looked at the new FEMA draft maps, was not able to discern which structures were actually in the special flood hazard area. And our advice was to work with the regional planning commissions to attempt to geo-reference them. Knowing that there is, the draft maps are not to be shared with the general public, it's to be shared with local officials. Do you have any other suggestions about discerning the information on the draft maps, which are generally distributed in PDF form, which can be hard to read?
There is, Sasha?
I was just going to add, I think, the maps will become preliminary at a certain point, and so the community will be able to share those. Most of these maps are going to be going in a good direction as far as the accuracy and being able to look at a specific property. And particularly if you have lake shores, it will be possible to find kind of a land contour around the lake where you can just look at elevation information to get a better idea of what properties are affected and what buildings are more at risk.
Okay, great.
Tessa, if you want to go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, whether it's your regional planning commission or Ned and myself, Ned Swanberg, works on our team as well. We can also always set up time to look through these work maps with you and open them in a JS platform instead of looking at PDFs, which can be really tricky. So we can always help walk through those.
Okay. And I knew this question would come up. Many towns in our region are struggling with limited capacity. They don't have the manpower or knowledge to enforce regulations. And what do you recommend for towns in this position? I know that this is not a perfect answer, but we do have a number of small communities that share a circuit rider. Somebody who works in 2 towns, sometimes more. It's not a perfect solution because when there is a flood, as I think that like Kristen can confirm, the workload could increase exponentially. And you may not be able to continue to divide your time equally between towns. But that is an issue that we struggle with constantly. So if there are any other ideas for addressing manpower, I welcome them. Let's see, other question.
Thought the Loma process one from Faith was a good one, maybe.
The process one for,
Um,
okay, yeah.
Will the updated FEMA maps have any effect on the Loma process? It won't change the Loma process at all. In the process of updating the maps, they do go through and like validate the Lomas,
Yeah.
so the Lomas carry over from the past maps to the new maps. Sasha, do you have any other input on that?
Yeah, so those are the letters of map amendment, which is when, FEMA is officially weighing in on whether a specific property is mapped in the flood hazard area or not. Yeah, they're going to be reviewing those as part of the map update process.
Okay. What are the requirements for sending permit data to the regional floodplain manager if the repair or renovation is below the substantial limits? Does everything, no matter how small, need to go to the regional floodplain? And I think that it would be you, Sasha, Tessa, and Asa. My understanding was it was record keeping at the local level.
So yes, any permit applications that you are processing, any flood hazard area permit applications that you are processing do need to come to us for review.
Okay.
Including if they're below the substantial damage.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Regarding the floodway fringe, as opposed to just the floodway, regulations speak to specificity in the fringe as a sub-district, and it doesn't appear to be a mapped layer. Any ideas? I'm wondering if this community doesn't have a mapped floodway.
Oh, so that's a good catch. We kind of went really fast over what the SFHA is comprised of. So if we're to break it down, not all communities have a floodway, but the ones that Tessa showed earlier are a zone AE. A zone AE includes the floodway and it includes the flood fringe. So the floodway is the inner hatched area, and then the flood fringe is the zone AE that is outside of that. It's not usually labeled on a map as the flood fringe. It is usually labeled as zone AE, if that's helpful. Or if you don't have a floodway, you likely just have a zone A, which would not have a flood fringe.
Okay. So do you have to keep track of riverbank stabilization projects that are thought to be NRCS or ag related?
I believe the answer to that would be yes, as those often have to do with fill, or there's a cut and fill or grading or something of the sort, which is development that would need to be permitted. Sometimes those are just like plantings, which Sasha, I might defer to you on.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question very well.
Oh, sorry.
So it's regarding riverbank stabilization projects. Does the town need to be keeping track of those?
Okay. Yes. So state stream alteration permitting does come into play when you have any work within the river channel, but the National Flood Insurance Program permitting also is supposed to include changes to the river channel. So particularly if you have a mapped floodway, it's important to make sure that those stabilization projects are not going to change the river channel dimensions, etc. That is reviewed at the state level with the state stream alteration permit, but it is something that the town needs record of for the National Flood Insurance Program. Because it falls under the definition of all development.
This question, who is responsible for the permitting process? The owner, contractor, or the town? And by permitting process, I take that to mean being my understanding it, of course, it would be the zoning administrator, the floodplain administrator, who needs to keep copious records. Someone from town, it says that the list of E911 properties on the special flood hazard area and the list from FEMA are not aligned. So if they feel that there are discrepancies in what's in and what's out. So if they want to weigh in on updates when the new maps, the draft maps are released, how do they go about doing so?
I'm not sure I follow the question, but I would just say that if you have questions about like which properties are in or out, as Tessa was saying earlier, it would probably be good to reach out to her or Ned Swanberg, and they can look at the maps closely with you and figure out, what the issue might be.
Okay, and this was in the map update process, in the draft update.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so to be clear, if the new FEMA maps are published and a town has not adopted bylaws that meet NFIP standards, then the town will basically forfeit having any say in development or redevelopment of parcels within their FEMA recognized floodplain. I think what happens is that you could forfeit the right to participate in the NFIP.
Yeah, it's just a risk of suspension from the NFIP. Yeah, at that point.
I mean that no one in town could get.
Yeah. Also, I think we could probably do maybe one more question, and then I'd love for us to move on to our panelists.
Yes.
And we'll stop answering the questions live here, but I will try to type up answers for the remaining ones as we move into our panel discussion. Thank you for all the wonderful questions.
Yeah, thanks. Everyone's being so engaged. I'll put our emails in the chat as well. Hopefully everyone can see that. So people can email us if your question didn't get answered.
Yes, please email us if you have further questions or we did not get to your question.
Yeah. There's a great question here about finding a way to keep track of costs and receipts as people get their permits over like their 3-year window. I'm assuming that's for a substantial improvement. So maybe that's something that our panelists can address as well. So.
Okay. Great. Well, welcome, panelists. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your day to be here. I think it'll be really great to hear people's honest experiences in floodplain administration, and really what the day-to-day is like. We have prepared questions, but again, if people have questions for the panelists, we can put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to kind of sprinkle them in as we go. But we have Kristen Leahy, John Prue, and Dan Webster all here to chat with us. Panelists, we want this to be like a discussion or a conversation. We have prepared questions, but if you guys, want to follow up or respond to another panelist's answer, please be my guest. Either raise your hand or just unmute yourself and speak up. Either one is totally fine with us. But do you three want to just say hello and give a quick little intro, just, the town you're from again, and maybe how long you've been doing floodplain administration? Kristen, do you want to start?
Hi, I'm Kristen Leahy. I work for the town of Hardwick. I'm a zoning and floodplain administrator, and then I'm a resilience and adaptation coordinator. And I have been doing zoning for 15 years. Floodplain has been dabbled in for about 10 years, and the shift to doing more of it started 2 years ago with the July 2023 floods.
Sorry. Thank you. John?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
John Prue, Town of Linden. I've been the zoning administrator here for coming up on 3 years. So the floodplain administration didn't really do any. My first year did a little bit 2 years ago, did a whole lot last year. I was on the development review board here for 13 years before I took over as zoning administrator. So reviewed a bunch of permits that were floodplain related as the DRB chair. So I've been in it for a while, worked with Sasha for quite a few years now on stuff.
Great. Thank you for being here. And then Dan, I can't see you, but we can hopefully hear you. Do you want to introduce yourself? I'm not hearing anything. Is anyone else hearing anything? Okay. Oh, maybe Dan try leaving and returning. We can see if that'll work. All right. Well, we can.
He's not muted.
Yeah, I think it might be a tech issue, maybe on his end.
The tech gods have not smiled on us tonight.
No, they haven't, but it's okay. Yeah, Dan, maybe try exiting and coming back, and we'll see if we can see you or hear you. Why don't we? Oh, okay, it is a tech issue, so all right. Hopefully we can get you in. All right, so why don't we just start with our first question? I know panelists, you've seen these questions before, so hopefully they're not too surprising. But let's start with, what do you think is the most valuable part of having flood regulations in your community? Either of you feel free to go first, otherwise I'm happy to choose.
I'll jump on the first grenade, I guess. As far as what I think is the most important part of having flood regs, is that what I'm hearing? Essentially.
Yes.
Well, for the town of Linden, we have a lot of our town is in the river corridor, the flood hazard area. So, I mean, I think it definitely helps with safety, safe development, whatever. So sometimes I think permits that get approved, there could be question as to whether or not the development is quote unquote safe or not, even though they meet the bylaws. Sometimes we fall into the situation is just because you can do something, doesn't mean you should do something. And so, I mean, that's probably the most challenging part of having the flood regs, in my opinion. I think it's a good thing. I think if you're a town that is considering it, I would definitely give it a hard consideration to adopt something. As far as the river corridor stuff goes, I'm curious to see what the state level river corridor permitting is going to look like, and how that will affect what we do as municipalities that already have river corridor language. I guess as a panelist, I'm supposed to be answering questions, not asking questions, but sorry, that's all I got.
You can always ask questions. Yeah, I mean, with the river corridors, I think there's a lot of unknowns still before we get into rulemaking in a public process. But we will have soon a webpage about the Flood Safety Act, which will include river corridor information. So at least we can keep things updated up there for everybody to have. Kristen, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So floodplain regulations for Hardwick, we actually updated our regulations last year after the flooding in 23, made them a little tighter and a little more difficult to adhere to if you weren't going by what is probably going to be safe. Where we see them as an important part of our recovery, an important part of where we're going. We try to discuss them as a benefit to the town versus a punitive measure. We have a lot of conversations with people about being in the NFIP and what that means for us, and the fact that we do need to meet at least the basic standards, but also what happened in 23 was able to show us where we could go and what levels. So we were at base flood elevation for our elevations, and we've gone to 2 feet above at this point because flooding didn't stop at base flood elevation. I think the most difficult thing in this town with the flood regulations has been collecting permits of repairs after flooding. We waive all fees, but it's still, we try to make it into a almost an Easter egg hunt. Let's see how many we can get, folks, because it really helps with the future recovery projects, being able to show that you're doing the work, and ties into our substantial damage estimations and determinations. It's just, it's another tool. And I think that's the way to look at it personally.
Is there anything that would help your town or towns in general with getting those permits after a flood happens? Beyond capacity, obviously.
I think capacity is the big one.
Yeah.
For us, being prepared. I mean, what you said about having all your knowing who's in the special flood hazard area. For us, we have historic structures as well, so we need to know which ones are contributing to the historic districts. I have a file for every single one of our 175 structures and each file is on paper because sometimes you don't have power in a situation. I mean, we use the online substantial damage estimator, but we have paper files for every single one. And we have, we've done it by sections. So if a section is flooded, pretty much anyone in that section has flooded. We have check-ins from monitors, and we know what they normally go through. So we will show up with an industrial fan and help them get things, start gutting. And we make sure they know that they don't need a permit to gut, but they're going to need a permit to put it back together. So being prepared as much as you can. I mean, blue sky preparedness is going to be your best bet on this one. And then we do a lot with buyouts because we're trying to lessen how many people we have to reach in the floodplain.
Great, thank you. Dan, it looks like we have you online now. We can see you. Can we hear you? Oh no, I can't hear you. Can you hear us, Dan? Okay, I don't think we can hear you.
Dear.
But I can read what you said in the chat. I think for the first question, it was the ability to regulate building within the floodplain and river corridor. And it'd be nice to have a new flood map since the one I have is from 1991. Yes, I'm sure that's a common feeling across the state. Well, hopefully we can get your sound going, but if you would like to keep responding in the chat, I can keep reading off your answers. All right, we can go to our second question. Well, we asked, what support or resources do you have now? I guess we could kind of rephrase that as, what support or resources do you have now that you find the most helpful, if any? Kristen, I know you just answered before, but do you want to take another question?
Yeah, I can jump on too.
Okay, yeah.
Support and resources. I guess it depends on what we're talking about. If we're just talking about, somebody comes in with a permit that's in the flood hazard, as far as support and resources, I mean, I've leaned on Sasha Peeler a lot, especially since I took over here. She's been a huge help navigating permits and whatnot. As far as like a massive event, like what happened to us in 24, like what happened to Hardwick in 23. I mean, we also got hit in 23, but most of our damage in 23 was municipal. It was roads and bridges. It wasn't structures and properties. So just because you have flood regs and you've had flood regs for a long time and you have a FEMA compliant bylaw does not mean that you are prepared for a massive event. We were not prepared. We were not prepared for the July 10 event. And then just when we thought we might be making it back up to our knees on trying to stand up from July 10, we got punched in the face again on July 30. So just as far as reaching out to people and letting them know what was needed, trying to get them contacts, the resources, trying to get them information as far as what to do after a flood and the permitting and all that stuff. Sasha and Rebecca came over and helped me a lot during that time to try to go house to house. But during the downtime, your best resource is going to be come up with a solid plan on D-Day, when everything completely falls apart. Try to put together some kind of 3-ring binder that, thick binder of a process of how to do stuff, and just not knowing what to tell people that I needed for help, because I didn't even know what I needed for help because we were not prepared. So I would say the best resource you could give yourself would be try to come up with a plan for when there's a huge event. Just a single permit coming through the door for processing is pretty easy to handle. We have good resources for that at ANR. So, but the massive events, you got to have some sort of plan. I'm sure Kristen feels the same way.
Oh, yeah. I don't actually have one permit application. I have 6 for floodplain, just for floodplain, because we do administrative permits that are never going to go to you, Alexis. I'm sorry. You don't want them all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say VEM also, they were great. They talked us through a lot of the mitigation and response projects. The mutual aid groups in Hardwick, we have Neighbor to Neighbor, Civic Standard, NICO, Curve is your long-term regional. Hardwick's in a slightly different place in that we're in the Lamoille watershed. So we work a lot with Lamoille County versus all the Northeast Kingdom. We work with both. So we're constantly navigating that aspect. Your river scientist is, Ben Matthews was here he was here each day in July 2023 and in July 2024. He was here the day of the flooding so that we could start talking about what happened.
Great, thank you. See, Dan, we have some stuff from you in the chat. It looks like having Sasha to help is very important. Good job, Sasha. And maybe being able to get back to the permitters in the allotted time. Okay. And you have many floodplain permits for Lake Groton and some of the surrounding streams that are deemed as a floodplain. All right, thank you. Well, thanks for putting things in the chat. I'm sure that's not very easy. Dan, if you also have any ways that you like to prepare for a flood ahead of time, feel free to put those in the chat, because that sounds like a commonly agreed upon important thing to have. Let's see. Looks like Tabby commented that they would love to see some samples of the permitting docs, all 6, the combined ones. I'm updating and rewriting applications and bylaws.
They're on my website with a lot of other things.
Yeah, I bet.
So Hardwick VT. And there's actually a great handout that explains the difference between river corridors, floodways, and floodplains. And I highly recommend it. It's right next to my regs. So.
Excellent. Did you create that resource yourself?
Oh, no. That was, I wish I had that skill set. That was SLR created the words, and then Seiler Consulting put it together, and it was done by funding through DEC through 2 Rivers. And it was a project that came to Hardwick and we requested it. Can you tell me that backwards?
Yeah. Thank you. Are there any attendees that want to turn off their mic and ask a question? Or feel free to put it in the chat. Anybody want to speak up? Raise your hand.
I have one question. I'm just curious. I know that some of our communities have signed on with texting programs like Text My Gov. And do they see services like that as part of a flood response of endeavor? I think Hardwick has it, don't they?
Yeah, we've done VT Alert and Text My Gov, and we actually have approached this as emergency management, recovery, and floodplain management are all wrapped up together.
Okay.
That's why my job titles are extensive and keep growing.
Yeah.
Because it's the first step coming back into a house and knowing what kind of permits they're going to need is also talking to people and letting them know what's happening as far as like the rivers, if it's cresting, what level is it at. We're working on trying to get stream gauges. It's all part of it. We're seeing it as a cycle versus a top down. And yeah, so yes, we've had good luck with them. It's all it's all wrapped up together, I think.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I know you both kind of mentioned working with the Vermont Floodplain Management team a bit, but I'm curious if you could expand on what kind of issues you bring to your regional floodplain manager. What do you call them for, email them for, usually?
So outside of a flood event, I definitely use Sasha as a resource just for comment on permits, advice on stuff in the floodplain and in the river corridor, how they pertain to our bylaws specifically. When we did have the 24 event, Sasha and Rebecca Pfeiffer, for those of you who don't know, they came over and helped me out tremendously, boots on the ground, just trying to get information out to people, doing damage assessments and stuff like that. So right now those are kind of the two times I would reach out and what I would reach out for.
Yeah, Kristen, how about you?
Yeah. So same as far, in 23, Sasha and someone from Florida, I don't remember her name, Sasha, we did all our substantial damage estimations. And those became so important because we're still working with FEMA about how to view some of our critical infrastructures, whether it's substantially damaged or not. And one of the first things they asked is, did we do estimations for everything? And we did. So they were hoping to see that we didn't do that aspect of the process. So having Sasha come out and spend a week knocking on doors was really helpful. I usually I talk to almost everyone at the Floodplain Managers department in different ways. I think I'm I just bounce around depending on who can answer my question. And it's usually about anything and everything.
Everyone can offer something different. So yeah, just ask till you get the answer you need. Yeah.
I just want to make a brief comment. So this is kind of embarrassing for me. But I just want to say that this isn't just about like a specific floodplain manager. Our regional floodplain manager team is kind of transitioning to a point where we have a little more depth than we have historically. So this is actually a moment where we're hoping to kind of learn like how we can continue to improve our services with the local communities, because we really value the relationships that we have with the floodplain administrators. But it's not all about us. It is definitely all about the local communities and how they want to approach their floodplain issues. We're really just like here to try to like keep up with you in terms of coming up with things that are useful. So that's really like what I hope to see is like where the dialogue can continue to grow. And I'll be quiet now, but it's a work in progress.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and kind of leads a little bit into another question that I have is, do you see opportunities to collaborate with other communities around floodplain management and or flood resilience topics? I think that those relationships and partnerships between communities can't really be understated. Have you either developed kind of partnerships with other communities and collaborations, or is that something you'd like to do in the future? John, let's go back to you again.
Yeah, Linden hasn't done that yet. Not because I haven't wanted to. It's just been kind of a time thing. I've been interested in talking to other zoning administrators about stuff. That being said, a lot of times, I mean, I'm on the zoning administrators listserv, and there's like a flood listserv as well. And so a lot of times there's questions that are answered on that by other people within the state, either ZAs or, flood administrators. So, but I haven't like personally reached out to anybody yet, not because I haven't wanted to. I just haven't had time, haven't made the time, I guess.
Yeah. If there was sort of a meeting or something between zoning administrators or floodplain administrators within your watershed, is that something you would want to attend and find helpful? Yeah.
It's something that I've considered trying to put together myself. It just doesn't ever seem like I have enough time to do that. There's a lot going on in Linden, and it's hard to just keep up with the regular zoning stuff with the administration and the enforcement part for one person. So it's tricky I have a lot of ideas and wants. I just don't have the time to implement sometimes, so and with everything being time sensitive in zoning, you can't just back burner stuff because you want to. So yeah,
always comes back to capacity, it seems like.
Right.
Yeah. Kristen, how about you, in terms of opportunities to collaborate with other communities, or if you would also, like the zoning administrator collaboration specifically?
I'm all about the watersheds. I think Hardwick, because we got hit in 23 so hard, it's almost like we're at a different. You had the same thing in 24, John, is what it sounds like, and knowing what Nico had to go through for you guys. We're at the point now where we really are reaching out. We're seeing ourselves as a hub in this area, where we're right on the edge of all these different counties. We have 3 district transportation districts in our town. We're on a watershed that's, for the most part, not in this section of the state. We're actually working with Watersheds United, trying to see if we can have something developed for the Lamoille. And if I have good luck with that, John, I will pass that information on to you. I consistently try to reach out to towns around us. We do, when we open our supply and support in Hardwick, we get 8 different towns that come in and are assisted here during flooding, at least the last time. So we're really trying to create those networks in this general area and beyond. And the watershed, we have a watershed series that's going to be, we're working with NVDA and DEC and NRCCD. It's such an alphabet. We're working with a lot of different people and to present watershed issues at our local library, and it's open to everyone. And I really hope we can have people come and enjoy learning more about it. I mean, we've been focused a lot on Hardwick, but we really want to look around us because we're all impacting each other. And then for me, VEM recommends people to call me. So I do a lot of conversations and weekend work with people.
Yeah. It sounds like the more that towns can share their resources and their experiences, it's helpful for everybody, because everyone is, at their maximum capacity, right? I think, Dan, you had a bit of a different answer in the chat when it comes to collaborating with other communities. Dan said that other communities near me are dealing with their own problems, and many near me do not have the same lake problems as we have in Groton. Which is true, that every community is dealing with different things and needs different solutions. So thank you for that answer. I saw we had a question in the queue. Oh, we have a few questions in the Q&A, actually. Elizabeth had asked, have you ever needed to address a property filling in the floodplain without permits? Getting a nod from Kristen. Yes. Do you
They
want
had to take it out.
Yeah.
They weren't happy.
John, how about you? Have you had that experience?
We have reviewed some permits for fill in the flood hazard. Not under my time as ZA have we had to deal with somebody putting fill in. It has happened in the town of Linden where people have put fill in the flood hazard without a permit, but not in the short time that I've been in office here.
Thanks. Okay, we also have one from Anne in the chat. It's a bit of a long one, so I'll try and read through it. Sheffield and Wheelock have tried unsuccessfully twice to adopt the bylaws using the method of voting. Allison and Sasha helped tremendously. Do you think the time is right for select board to just go ahead with this? It's possible this is not a question for the panel, but I'm not entirely sure. Neither town has zoning. Wheelock is seriously in debt over 2024 damage. The big issue is being opposed to backdoor zoning and the intrusiveness of needing to report on interior renovations. From an administrative point of view, we would have to hire out an administrator, and that would be a big challenge. Advice and encouragement are welcome. Do any of our panelists have any advice on that? I can also reread it as well, if that's helpful.
I've been involved in many of those conversations, and it's interesting that there are some communities that are reluctant to adopt floodplain regulations because they regard it as backdoor zoning. The interesting thing is that we do have communities that participate in the National Flood Insurance Program that don't otherwise have zoning. And it has not ushered in zoning for them. So I think it comes down to a philosophical issue that's very hard to address. But if it means that your community can get more assistance when people have experienced significant losses, then you just need to weigh that. We've been having these conversations prior to 2011, 2023, and 2024, when primarily we were seeing damage that was mostly restricted to roads and transportation infrastructure. I think people have experienced flooding enough, like personal flooding. They all know people whose homes have been damaged or they've lost their homes. So maybe the time is right for those towns to resurrect the conversation. It can never hurt to keep talking about it too. I know that's not like an easy answer, but what happened in 2023 and 2024 were significantly different from the previous flood experiences that we've had, at least in recent history.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to have to start thinking in different ways about floodplain regulations and how to administer them. And no, the towns don't have the capacity. I live in Greensboro. They're worried about how they're going to address it as they increase. I would say that we're having conversations with our long-term recovery groups like Curve and Nico, who did a lot of the cleanup in Linden and other towns. They're on boots on the ground and they're talking to people almost immediately. There has to be some way that we can work all together to get people to where they need to be safe and whole. And if Nico is helping to get volunteers in there might be a way to have someone who's embedded in both in a group of towns that's overseen by someone else. I mean, we have to start thinking more creatively instead of saying we can't do it. It just, you know, it used to be if you got 5 inches in a 24 hours, that was a big deal. We can now get to 5 inches in 2 hours. All of our stormwater systems, even the newest ones, they're not responding well. And we're having places that never had flooding before are having it again. And more so.
John, has your community worked as well with some of the, on the ground groups, smaller community groups, long-term recovery groups, anything like that?
I know Curve has been here. I've worked with some of the people from that organization. I mean, Red Cross was here like immediately after both floods. They were pretty amazing as far as just getting people basics. I mean, water, and you don't realize how important it is to be able to turn on your faucet and get a glass of water until it's gone. So we were fortunate there. We're super fortunate in Linden to have the size of the volunteer fire department we have with the trainings that they have. I mean, we have a swift water team with all kinds of gear and so they get out there. But as far as the other agencies that you were talking about, Curve is the only one that I can remember talking to. Actually, some of those people were in here just recently, just checking in with me.
Nico's the one that did all the cleaning. Curve's the long term.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're just two different versions of the same thing.
Yep. As far as writing of the bylaws, not to circle backwards, but Town of Linden's had flood regs for a while, and they've been through, like in the last 10 years, they've been through a couple of changes. When I first started on the development review board here, they were fairly liberal as far as what could happen for development. And then I think it was around 2015 or 16, there was a change that made it quite a lot more restrictive. And then the last rewrite that we went through was pretty contentious. Sasha was more involved in that than I was. I as the DRB chair, I kind of tried to stay neutral and kind of look at it as a fly on the wall and stay out of the rewrite. But that process took 2 years. And I think at the end of the day, when what we have now was adopted, I don't necessarily think anybody was happy with it. I mean, it was a compromise, but I don't think either side was pleased. So for anybody that is considering writing flood regs for your town, it might not be a short process. It could take a while. That depends on how it's perceived, I guess. But so you should be aware of that.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you. We have just like 5 minutes left already. I want to see if there's any attendees that want to put any more questions in our Q&A, or if you want to speak up, we can turn your microphone off. I think I have a couple more questions for our panelists, but I'm happy to take any more. Actually, it looks like Delilah has a follow-up, Kristen, for you on the people who put fill unpermitted. She said, when you've directed them to remove fill, have they tried to appeal?
No, they just did it. I've done a lot of work with everybody on that sort of thing. They didn't know they couldn't do.
Thank you. Okay. I think we've talked a lot about, during flood times, which is kind of becoming our norm, I would say. But what would you say your workload is like administering floodplain regs in blue sky times? What is that like for you both?
For me, I would say it's pretty easy. I mean, our regs are pretty clear. And I know Sasha just said that she doesn't want to be singled out, but she's been my contact as our regional person. So she's really great about getting back with advice and stuff. And so if blue sky time, somebody comes in and you have the luxury of time to look over the application and give it some consideration. I think it's fairly easy if you have well-written regs, which I think we have. Whether you agree with them or not is another question. But so yeah, blue sky times, if you have well-written regs, same with our bylaws. I think we have well-written bylaws in general, not just the flood section, but having pretty clear bylaws on what is allowed and what is not allowed definitely makes blue sky permitting much easier.
Great, thank you. Dan, you're back. Can we hear you yet? I don't think so.
We only have a few more minutes, and I think there was a previous question that was asked about what might happen to floodplain administrators' responsibilities in 2028. And that's
really quick, I do want to just give Kristen the opportunity to answer that question about, no, you're totally fine, about the blue sky times and your workload during that time. And then, yeah, we can get to, it looks like, Steve's question in the chat.
We're working on recovery, flood resilience and recovery. We're doing inventories of entire neighborhoods and trying to see what they need to be more flood resilient. So, and then because we've already brought the regs into where we feel we need to be, and we're working on river corridor also because we haven't had that.
Okay.
So it continues. It's not as rushed. My desk isn't covered with blue files.
That's kind of related to Steve's question, who asked, do you see the floodplain administrator responsibilities changing dramatically in 2028 when the state takes over oversight of the new river corridor law, the Flood Safety Act, Act 121? Do you see? No.
No,
John,
we're going to continue. We want to continue to oversee river corridors at that time.
John, how about you? Do you foresee things changing much?
I don't know. I haven't seen what the legislation is going to bring. If it's just river corridor, then no, because I still have to administer permits for flood hazard. I mean,
yeah,
the river corridor language isn't going to take over all the stuff that pertains to the flood insurance areas, the FEMA areas. So, I mean, maybe a little, but not, not a ton. I don't see it changing much at all.
Sure. Yeah. And I guess, we don't exactly know what's going to happen in 2028 with river corridors, and, if towns will continue to regulate them themselves. So that's still an open question. But yes, totally right that there's still the special flood hazard area regulations to oversee. Yeah.
I mean, we see permits in the river corridor now because we have language for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if the legislation is going to, put the responsibility or allow the responsibility to be on the municipal administrators. If you have, flood river corridor regs that match what the state wants to see, I mean, that might be their approach to handling it. Or if everything just needs to go to the state level, I don't know how it's going to change. But even if they still keep it so it's administratively done, if you have applicable bylaws, it won't change us at all because we already do it. I mean, some towns that aren't doing it, it would add to them, but it wouldn't change anything for Linden.
Yeah. Yeah, Garrett, I see your question in the chat that you'd asked earlier about the state involvement in river corridor permitting. The part of the Flood Safety Act is that the state would have jurisdiction over river corridors statewide. We still have a rulemaking process. We don't entirely know yet. The lights keep going off because I'm the only one in the office at the moment. We don't know yet what's going to happen if towns who have river corridors already in their bylaws will continue to regulate them or not. So that's an ongoing process. And then in terms of why the state felt it was necessary to go beyond FEMA's flood hazard zone requirements, I mean, the FEMA, the NFIP standards are a minimum, and that's it. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to make development in the SFHA safe. So the idea is that the state would address both higher standards for the for floodplains as well as addressing river corridor erosion. But if you would feel free to email me and we can always set up time to chat about it. But thank you for asking the question.
One thing, can I just add one thing to that, to your answer about that?
Yeah.
It's that river corridor regulation also reflected the fact that only a small percentage of our flood related losses actually occur in areas that are appear on the FEMA maps. The FEMA maps have very limited information, and the lateral movement of the stream channel over time was a very real risk in Vermont. So that was the impetus behind it. So I didn't want to interrupt you, but I think he was trying to get at more of a philosophical reason. And I think
Yes, thank
it's
you.
important to remember that our losses don't adhere to the boundaries that are delineated on those FEMA maps, which in many of our towns are nothing but gray blobs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Allison. All right. Well, we are at 6:33. So we're 3 minutes past, but Kristen and John, thank you so much for coming and taking your time to chat with us. I think hearing about your experiences was really, really beneficial for everybody here. So thank you to all our attendees for joining us this evening. We will make sure we send out links, our slide deck, and we'll send out the recording as well once we can. But thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.